As much as we idolized Jo, she was drowning in internalized misogyny. Jo and Laurie were brothers. They planned to run away together. They had good time making pranks, and they made fun of the feminine girls Laurie used to flirt with in college. One of the best examples of internalized misogyny is in chapter 21. Laurie makes mischief and Jo makes peace. In this chapter, Laurie pretends to be his tutor, John Brooke, and he sends letters to Meg in his name, who he knows Brooke has feelings for. Quote, "She was quite right, for the mischief-loving lad no sooner suspected a mystery than he set himself to find it out, led Jo a trying life of it. He wheedled, bribed, ridiculed, threatened and scolded, affected indifference, that he might surprise the truth from her, declared her new, then that he didn't care, and at last, by dint of perseverance, he satisfied himself that it concerned Meg and Mr. Brooke, feeling indignant that he was not taken into his tutor's confidence. He set his wits to work to devise some proper retaliation for the slight. Jo's reactions throughout the chapter, however, has annoyed plenty of contemporary readers, and so have Laurie's actions. Jo's first reaction is to beat up Laurie and defend Meg's honor. "Oh, the little villain! That's the way he meant to pay me for keeping my word to mother. I'll give him a hearty scolding and bring him over to beg pardon," cried Jo, burning to execute immediate justice, but her mother held her back, saying, with a look she seldom wore, seeing Meg's usually gentle temper was roused and her pride hurt by this mischievous joke, Mrs. March soothed her with promises of entire silence and great discretion for the future. The instant Laurie's step was heard in the hall, Meg fled into the study, and Mrs. March received the culprit alone. Jo had not told him why he was wanted, fearing he wouldn't come, but he knew the minute he saw Mrs. March's face, and stood twirling his hat with a guilty air which convicted him at once. Jo was dismissed, but chose to march up and down the hall like a sentinel, having some fear that the prisoner might bolt. The sound of voices in the parlor rose and fell for half an hour, but what happened during that interview the girls never knew. When they were called in, Laurie was standing by their mother with such penitent face that Jo forgave him on the spot, but did not think it wise to betray the fact. Meg received his humble apology and was much comforted by the assurance that Brooke knew nothing of the joke. Jo stood aloof, meanwhile trying to harden her heart against him, and succeedingly only in priming up her face into an expression of entire disapprobation. Laurie looked at her once or twice, but as she showed no sign of relenting, he felt injured and turned his back on her till the others were done with him, when he made her a low bow and walked off without a word. As soon as he had gone, she wished she had been more forgiving, and when Meg and her mother went upstairs, she felt lonely and longed for Teddy. After resisting for some time, she yielded to the impulse and, armed with a book return, went over to the big house. When Laurie is scolded by Mommy, Jo quickly forgives him and sees the whole thing only as a harmless prank. She has difficulties understanding how much Laurie's mischief hurts her sister. This is what Meg says: "If John doesn't know anything about this nonsense, don't tell him, and make Jo and Laurie hold their tongues. I won't be deceived and plagued and made a fool. It is a shame." Meg is in an age where if this prank would have turned into a rumor, it would have severely hurt Meg's reputation, and John's as well. Meg's response is very mature. Considering the time, there is very little that Meg can do when something like this happens. Back at the Lawrences, Laurie is lectured by his grandfather. "No, he would have the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I'd have told my part of the scrape if I could without bringing Meg in. As I couldn't, I held my tongue and bore the scolding till the old gentleman collared me. Then I bolted, for fear I should forget myself. It was nice, but he's sorry, I know, so go down and make up. I will help you. Hanged if I do. I am not going to be lectured and pummeled by everyone, just for a bit of frolic. I was sorry about Meg and begged pardon like a man, but I won't do it again when I wasn't in the wrong. He didn't know that. He ought to trust me and not act as if I was a baby. It is no use, Jo. He's got to learn that I am able to take care of myself and don't need anyone's apron strings to hold on by. Jo works as a mediator between Laurie and the older Mr. Lawrence. After being forced to apologize to Meg, Laurie is now expecting his grandfather to apologize to him for lecturing him without no reason. He refuses to see any faults in his actions. The next moment he is asking Jo to go to Washington to see Mr. Brooke, and Jo is tempted, but she is mature enough to see that such trip is Laurie only trying to escape facing his grandfather. There is of course an actual reason why Laurie and his grandfather's relationship is difficult, and why he is constantly looking for attention, but that does not justify his actions. Mr. Lawrence's ruddy face changed suddenly, and he sat down with a troubled glance at the picture of a handsome man which hung over his table. It was Laurie's father, who had run away in his youth and married against the imperious old man's will. Jo fancied her, remembered and regretted the past, and she wished she had held her tongue. One thing I have noticed while doing gender studies on Little Women characters and talking to fans across the world is that this chapter is more than often ignored, and the focus isn't on the prank that Laurie makes on Meg, but it is on Laurie's and Jo's conversation. Why didn't Jo just agree to go with Laurie to Washington and have fun? Nothing bad happens as long as Jo is happy. Thank you so much for sharing my love for Little Woman. All the transcriptions of the Little Woman podcast are now available as paperbacks, ebooks, and as audiobooks on Amazon, Kindle, Nook, and bookstores. You can find all the links from the description. And now, back to the show. One fan I chatted with said, "Why to care since no one is hurt?" What about Meg? For many, Meg seems to be a less valid person in the story than Jo is. Jo forgives Laurie, so aren't we obliged to forgive Laurie as well? In her analysis on this very same chapter, Jan Albertini brings out many of the similar themes I have presented here. No matter how much time Laurie spends with Jo, her sisters, or Marmee, Laurie lives in a man's world, and so do the women, whether grown or little. Jo's reaction can feel almost as violating as Laurie's actions, because Jo is the protagonist, and even though she is participating to cover up Laurie's behavior, she does not question it, unlike Marmee and Meg. The idealization of both Jo and Laurie is so deeply rooted in our culture. This chapter has never been adapted into any of the movies. Chapter captures both Jo's and Laurie's fast mood changes and their parallel tempers. We also see that Meg is a very strong person. In this case, a lot more feminist than Jo, whose growth process is only beginning. This is a quote from a Jo drama march. At the risk of alienating my fellow Louisa May Alcott enthusiasts and schoolers, one of my students has urged me to be thoughtful about the following. Would Theodore Laurie Lawrence be lauded for his actions and behavior by modern standards, or would he be censored? I am always hesitant to evaluate the actions of a literature character written over a century ago through the lenses of the present, but I do feel it is a question that merits discussion. I am deeply respectful of Louisa May Alcott, her exceptional work, and her remarkable life, but the boys will be boys latitude that Laurie's character is given strikes me as odious at several moments throughout Little Woman." End quote. Jo does have internalized misogyny. Sometimes she wishes that she could be a man and not a woman, and identifies more with men, at least at the beginning of the novel, and then slowly begins to find the balance between the masculine and the feminine. Other than her mother and her sisters, she doesn't seem to enjoy the company of other women. At the end of the novel, when Friedrich comes courting, the narrator says that Jo forgot to compare him to Laurie, who had been her model of masculinity. When she gets into a relationship with Friedrich, she begins to treat other women with more respect because he does. The same happens with Laurie in his relationship with Amy. He becomes a lot more considerate of the other people around him, and he even apologizes to Jo at the end of the novel about the way he behaved towards her. That is never in the Little Woman films, because Laurie's character arc has never been adapted, not fully. When Jo and Laurie grow up, he takes a role that is almost overly masculine. He low-key tries to encourage her to flirt with him, and then he threatens to kill himself if Jo does not marry him. This breaks Jo's ideas of masculinity the way she knew them. In the book, Jo travels to New York because she gets anxious to be alone with Laurie. Nothing sweet or romantic about that. She even says to Mommy that she needs to leave because she does not like him in that way. And then in New York, she opens her heart to Friedrich, and Laurie proposes after Jo has returned. In the movies, Laurie proposes before she goes to New York. So you will never get the real reason why Jo rejected him. She was in love with Friedrich. When Louisa May Alcott wrote Little Woman, there was discrimination against both German and Italian immigrants. Laurie first becomes friends with the Marches, who represent Louisa's transcendentalist philosophy of the transnational family. But because Laurie comes from a wealthy family, he does not face the same level of discrimination as Friedrich's character does. There has been lots of criticism towards Little Woman adaptations because they do not include immigration themes, and in some cases they even make fun of them. Throughout the whole promotional tour of the 2019 film, Greta Gerwig complained about Friedrich being German and speaking with a German accent. Louisa May Alcott adored everything that came from Germany and even studied German herself. This is another quote from That Vermilion Flycatcher. How the film and TV adaptations of Little Woman consistently ignore the fact that Laurie is described as tall and dark, brown skin with black eyes and black curly hair. It isn't just about representation, though it is important, but about who Laurie is as a character, why he is the way he is, and how his relationship with his grandfather is the way it is. Laurie's physical appearance tells us that he is half Italian, and that he looks Italian, and Louisa May Alcott makes a point emphasizing that. This is what Jo says in Little Woman. "How I wish I was going to college. You don't look as if you like it. I hate it. Nothing but grinding or skylarking, and I don't like the way fellows do either in this country. What do you like? To live in Italy and to enjoy myself in any way." And this is from another chapter. That is why he has such handsome black eyes and pretty manners. "Italians are always so nice," said Meg, who was a little sentimental. "He looked like an Italian, was dressed like an Englishman, and had an independent air of an American." For the Italian part of his nature, there was a touch of superstition. The pair of roses Amy gave him were sort of Italian, laid in their dead hands, never in bridal wreaths, and for the moment he wondered if the omen was for Jo or himself. And this is a quote about Amy. "She watched him for a moment with artistic pleasure, thinking how like Italian he looked, as he lay basking in the sun with an uncovered head and eyes full of sudden dreaminess, for he seemed to have forgotten her and fallen into a reverie. An explanation as to why this is important can be found in Mommy's explanation. "Mother, why did Mr. Lawrence like to have Laurie play?" asked Jo, who was in inquiring disposition. "I am not sure, but I think it is because his son, Laurie's father, married an Italian lady, musician, which displeased the very proud old man. The lady was good and lovely and accomplished, but he did not like her and never saw his son after he married. They both died when Laurie was a little child, and then his grandfather took him home. I fancy the boy, who was born in Italy, is not very strong, and the old man is afraid of losing him, which made him so careful. Laurie comes naturally from his love for music, for he is like his mother, and I dare say his grandfather fears that he may want to be a musician. At any rate, his skill reminds him of the woman he did not like, and so he glowered, as Jo said. Laurie is an orphan who lost his parents at an early age. Mr. Lawrence, who had cut ties with his son, learns that his son has died before they could get reconciled, and that he had a grandchild he had to take care of from then onwards. As he doesn't know what to do, he keeps Laurie in Europe, attending school there. Laurie was practically an institutionalized child. Mr. Lawrence finally hires a tutor for Laurie and brings him home to live with him. By the start of the novel, they have known each other for a very short time. Laurie wants to go back to Europe, to treat his roots, to be in the play to which he, by temper and looks, feels like he belongs. Laurie's appearance is a constant reminder that he doesn't quite fit in Concord society, and this only changes when the Marches make him one of their own. That is why he has a mother-son relationship with Marmee. That is one of the reasons why he is so dejected when Jo refuses him. That is why he is so lousy at college. Mr. Lawrence, on his side, is terrified of losing Laurie the same way he has lost both of his children. Both musically inclined, as was Laurie's mother, of whom Laurie bears the resemblance, and one can suppose his wife, at a young age. It is no wonder that he doesn't want Laurie to play or dedicate himself to music. It is only his story arc with Beth that helps him recover from his aversion to music, and it is in this light how important for him as a character is his offer to Laurie. After the failed proposal to go to Europe with him, try his art and enjoy himself, Mr. Lawrence wants to be there for his grandson and correct somehow what he didn't do for his son. Laurie isn't just the standard boy next door, he is a character in his own right that cannot be understood properly unless his background is taken into account, because it significantly shapes his temper and the way he relates to other characters in the novel. That is why he needs to be played by an actor who has dark skin, black eyes, and curly hair." End quote. To give you some context, Louisa May Alcott also emphasizes Friedrich being German. Quote, "Being a German, he loved these simple domestic festivals and encouraged them with all of his heart, for they made home so pleasant that the boys did not care to go elsewhere for fun. When Friedrich's nephew Emil returns from his sea voyage, he, quote, kissed all the women and shook hands with all the men except his uncle. Him he embraced in the good old German style." And this is about Jo's and Friedrich's son. Standing next to his father at the head of the table, folded his hands, reverently bent his own curly head, and softly repeated a short grace in the devout German fashion, which Mr. Bear loved and taught his little son to honor. Those were some of my thoughts and the thoughts of my listeners about Laurie's Italian heritage and his brown skin. We would like to hear your thoughts as well, and feel free to leave them on the comments. Thank you so much for listening. Take care and make good choices.